Hello whisky fans and happy St George's Day. I've got some bad news for you though. It's been a really bad month for the bottle ban. Anyone that's been a regular viewer will know that I said that I wanted to buy as few as possible, preferably none at all, no bottles over 2023. And I'm recording this in late April 2023, but I've bought not one but 3 bottles. And this hasn't been from a moment of weakness, this isn't a lapse. They are 3 bottles that I've been waiting for a very long time for, and for 3 very different reasons. And the first one's the whiskey that I'm going to be looking at today. This is one that I've been waiting for a long time because I've had this one on my shelf. This is the second bottle of this that I bought. And I've been keeping this because I knew that they'd come out with another new release of this style of whiskey. And I want to do a little comparison when it eventually arrived. The second bottle that I've bought recently, which will probably be next week's review, it's, shall we say, a very hotly anticipated, very hyped up, very peaty dram that you might be able to guess. Especially if you remember when I did my It's the Whiskey of the Year video, wasn't it? I said that I wouldn't buy, or I'd limit my bottle intake as much as possible. And I said at the time there are a few exceptions that I might buy if they turned up, and this was one of the ones that I mentioned back then. The third one is a new release from quite a new distillery, and this isn't one that I plan to purchase, but I'm still intending to release my series of reviews from new whiskey distilleries, and I think that this one fits in really nicely with that, especially seeing as this third bottle that I've bought is from a distillery that you very, very rarely see bottled. You might be able to guess that one, but probably not. So those other 2 bottles, they'll probably be next week's review and the one after that. This is absolutely not the end of the bottle ban though. These were kind of foreseen exceptions to the rule and should be my only 3 bottles for 2023. Maybe. Hopefully. I think I'll be fairly happy if I can cut it down to 3 bottles in a year. That's still drastically limiting the intake, thinning out the stocks a bit, while still allowing me to review these whiskies that I've been waiting to review, things that I really want to cover. Sticking with today's whiskey though, it's another English whiskey from the English Whisky Company, St George's Distillery in Norfolk. It's the English, they used to call this stuff Chapter 17. That's probably not going to mean a lot to many of you though. It's basically Norfolk triple distilled single malt. So this one, they're calling it, it's one of their small batch releases, small batch whiskey, and they're calling it limited release triple distilled. So like all of their small batch limited release whiskies that aren't cask strength, it comes in at 46% ABV. It's an unpeated whiskey because it says on the front phenol level 0. It was distilled in 2015 and bottled in 2023, making it 7 years old and 4 months. We also know this is a small batch of 2,658 bottles, so it is a fairly small batch. This stuff was actually released in February this year, and because there's not that much hype relatively over the English Whisky Company, this stuff is actually still available after a couple of months despite that fairly small batch size. As for the rest of the important details, it does actually state non-chill filtered on the back of the box, because all English whisky from the Norfolk Distillery is non-chill filtered, but that commitment is only on the back of the box. Sadly, like a lot of current modern releases from the English Whisky Company, doesn't say non-chill filtered or natural colour on the label. So, as we've said before, if you contact English Whisky Company, they'll tell you that it is a full craft presentation, but they just no longer guarantee it on the label, and that's a real pet hate of mine. In my opinion, if you're making a whisky properly, that's not something that you should keep a secret. Please, the English and all whisky distilleries, make it easy for us to be proud to buy your products. So, apart from that reasonably minor annoyance, it's the same kind of physical presentations we've seen from a lot of the small batch releases from English Whisky Company recently. The same absolutely beautiful decanter style bottle, same white, blue and gold foil sort of embellished box. They have actually had a little bit of a rebrand, a lot of redesign of their logo, something that Jeff Whiskey might be interested in. that little thing up there, I can't remember if that was on there on the last English Whisky Company whisky that I've reviewed, but they've kind of changed their little still and pagoda roof logo. And as it's been for a while, it's no longer the English Whisky Company, it's now the English, or the English Distillery. I have loved almost every whisky that I've ever had from them, and I've tried almost all of it. And in particular, I've always really enjoyed their triple distilled releases, both their peated and unpeated triple distilled whiskies. So let's get some of this one in the glass. So even though they don't tell us that this is non-chill filtered and natural colour on the label, well, they do say non-chill filtered on the box, but you can see from it that that looks very much like a natural colour whisky, and it has got, even at 46%, I haven't added any water, even at 46% it has got a distinct haze to it. So English Whisky Company triple distilled on the nose. You can really smell the influence of the barley on this one. It's a very gristy, biscuity single malt, and that's something that I always really like. There's also quite a lot of vanilla on the nose, vanilla cream, vanilla ice cream, like a 99, and a very distinctive, very sort of textbook triple distilled, juicy fruitiness, strong notes of peach, a little bit of diluted honey on the nose, and a bright, sweet tangerine and stone fruits note. So I think a lot of people, if they were given this blind, they might not be able to tell that it's English whiskey, although there are signs there, but I think that a lot of people would recognise this as textbook triple distilled, which is good. Let's see how it tastes. Quite a lot more dry on the palate. Dry astringent oak, dry and sour grapefruit notes. So a sharp fruitiness, more of that vanilla cream, and that sweet tangerine note coming back, but more of a tinned peaches and nectarines in syrup note. It's still got that sharp fruitiness to it, but it's also got a very syrupy, sweet quality to it. Sweet and bright, focused, refined. Simple in a way, but not in a bad way. And towards the late palate, I think that kind of gristy, biscuity note comes back with a little bit of a malted milk biscuits note. As for the finish, I'm going to say long, with notes of vanilla, bitter grapefruit, a nice saltiness, and some really nice dry barley notes on the late finish. So one thing that probably does have to be mentioned with this, that lovely, sharp, fruity grapefruit note, slightly tropical fruit, and the peach, and the biscuitiness, it's all a little bit Irish. I think if you like bourbon matured hazelburn, yellow spot, Bushmills, things like Jameson's, then I think you'll love this one too. I do think that it's a little bit of a style that you have to be into though. I can see a lot of Scotch drinkers, sort of traditional Scotch drinkers, might be a little bit disappointed in this because it is very much not your average double distilled single malt. I don't think it's quite got the body and the weight of a traditional double distillation, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just different. I think that the triple distillation in this, it makes it focused in a similar way to what a grain whiskey gets, but kind of in the opposite direction. I think that when you have a grain whiskey, they quite often become very sugary, like a crystalline, refined sugar note in a lot of grain whiskies, whereas this has the same level of sweetness, but it's more of a sharp sweetness. I absolutely love it though, and I've always loved the flavour profile of a good triple distilled whiskey, and in my opinion, as is often the case, the best examples of triple distilled whiskey aren't necessarily Irish. I think if you're looking for triple distilled, this stuff is really good. Ben Romack make amazing triple distilled whiskey, and obviously Hazelburn if you can get it. So yeah, the Irish might be kind of famous for triple distillation, but there's lots of other at least as good examples out there from other places. Although as a Scotch drinking Englishman, that might just be a little bit of my personal preference coming out. So at some point I will do a review of the older English Whisky Company triple distilled. This one was bottled in 2015, so it's quite an old bottle now. I've had this on my shelf for best part of a decade. Doesn't time fly? I probably won't release this one next week because you don't want two similar whiskies in a row like that. Or maybe you do, let me know. But I think there are other pressing releases that need to be reviewed next week. Either way, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think about this one if you've had it, and triple distilled whiskey in general. Thanks for watching, and cheers.